All right, Rabbi, say good morning, good morning. Let us begin. An incredible daf ahead of us today. Begin by thanking our sponsor, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan. To thank Meir and Rachel Gold for dedicating all the Shur and Drushos this month. In memory of Yonah, Tzvi, ben Yosef, Chaim, Elazar, HaKohen, and to Zichron Lebracha, and to thank Noam Leah Efron for dedicating all the Shur and Drushos this month in celebration of the 98th birthday of Noam's grandfather, Yosef Hershel ben Mordechai Halevi. We also thank our shir sponsor for today, Steve Golaskov, for dedicating the shir in the Zechus of Rafua Shalema for his father, Nochum Sender ben Ito Rachel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, he together with Kol Cholei Yisrael will have a complete and enduring Rafua. But with that, let us begin. We really have a very exciting daf. The next couple of blot are just, almost feels, it's too exciting. It's too exciting. It's too much. So let's begin. We're starting actually top of Chav Beis. I tried to get to the Mishnah yesterday, but I was already 5 minutes into Mincha time, so we stopped at literally the top of Chav Beis Amud Aleph. So remember again, the Mishnah says as follows. So the theme of the Mishnah was that one is permitted to be Mechalel Shabbos, right? One is permitted to go ahead and even desecrate Shabbos. And I want to point out, of course, something very important. Whenever we speak about that one is permitted to desecrate Shabbos, of course, if you're permitted to do it, then what? It's not desecration of Shabbos. That statement in and of itself is an anomaly. In general, when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos, when you're allowed to do something on Shabbos that you're not normally allowed to do, there's a fundamental machlokes in halacha if it's hutra or dichuy. You know where this comes up? Most notably is in the realm of pikuach nefesh. We know that on Shabbos you're permitted to go ahead and do whatever you have to do to save a life. So there's a halachic shay, there's a mechanism of that. Do we say that Shabbos is hutra? So, for example, in a situation of pikuach nefesh, do we just say, there's a danger to life? It's not Shabbos. It's not Shabbos. Let's do it. It's as if it's Sunday. It's as if it's Sunday. Or do we say, no, it's not hutra Shabbos, it's dechuya. The laws of Shabbos are set aside. They're still set aside. I'm sorry, it's still Shabbos, but Allah, the laws of Shabbos are set aside. What's the nafkamina? That's practical difference. The practical difference is actually quite fascinating. When there is a pikuach nefesh situation, are you obligated to try to minimize the amount of malacha you're doing in the performance of pikuach nefesh? In other words, I have a heter to now, somebody's in danger, I have a heter to do. Do I have to think about how I should minimize the malachas? Or do I say no? Once there's pikuach nefesh, it's Sunday. It's Sunday. So just pointing out over here, when we say we're permitted to desecrate Shabbos, so again, remember, if it's permitted, it's not a desecration, right? If it's not permitted, but the point over here is the Mishnah was teaching us that for the sake of Eidos HaChodesh, let's remember again, we made a very important distinction yesterday. There are two different groups of people who we're dealing with, right? Remember, who are the two different groups? Group A are the witnesses who see the moon and are coming to Beis Din to give their testimony. The second group is who? The people, the shluchim, who are then being dispatched from Beis Din into the outlying communities to communicate that Rosh Chodesh has been declared. So far, what we have seen is the only people who are permitted to go ahead and quote-unquote violate Shabbos are the Eidim coming to give testimony about the new moon. The shluchim who go out do not have that license. So the Gemara tells a story, Mishnah tells a story. There was a story that one time 40 sets of witnesses were passing by and Rabbi Akiva stopped them in Lud, which seems to indicate that halacha l'maisa Rabbi Akiva felt that again, it's not exactly clear what Rabbi Akiva's motivations were. It could be that Rabbi Akiva felt the moon was so clearly visible the night before. There's no need for all of these people to travel on Shabbos, whatever the Messias was. And remember again, Rabbi Gamliel intervened, and Rabbi Gamliel said, you're wrong, don't do that, because if you stop them from going now, then what's going to happen? In the future, they're not going to go either. So the Gemara says, Tanya, I'm Rabbi Yehuda, Chas v'shalom Rabbi Akiva ikva. No, it wasn't Rabbi Akiva. It was not Rabbi Akiva. Chas v'shalom that it should be Rabbi Akiva. Ella shezefer Rosh shel Gader. Rather, it was a guy, Shezefer, that's his name. Shezefer, he was the head of the city of Gader. He was the one, Ikvan, he was the one who prevented the witnesses from coming along. The Shalach, Rabbi Gamliel Baridu Migdulaso. And Rabbi Gamliel was so upset with Shezefer that Rabbi Gamliel went ahead and removed him from his position of authority. So also what's interesting to note is as follows. I'd like to learn. Okay, all right. So ultimately, again, so Shezefer was removed from his position of influence as a result of this particular situation. So I'll say it's interesting. I saw quoted in the name of the Sfas Emes that the Sfas Emes says, so how did Rabbi Akiva get, like, how does that happen? People always confuse Shezefer and Rabbi Akiva, right? Like those are two, right? How does that happen exactly? So the Sfas Emes says something amazing. He says, actually, the way the story unfolded, I don't know what he bases this on, but he says that the way the story unfolded was like this. This guy, Shezefer, was stopping people in the city of Gader. That was a city, right? It was a city between Lud and Yerushalayim. When Rabbi Akiva saw that people were getting stopped in Gader, he already stopped them in Lud because he realized if they're not going to get to go anywhere because this guy Shezefer anyway is stopping them, I might as well stop them here in Lud already. In other words, there's no point in traveling from Lud to Shezefer if they're going to get stopped in Shezefer. So that's how the Sfas Emes reconciles this a little bit. And whereas initially the Gemara says we thought it was Rabbi Akiva was stopping everyone, no. Rabbi Akiva was in line with the Tanna Kama. The witnesses are permitted to go. But once he saw that already they were being stopped in Gader, ultimately he stops them in Lud a little bit earlier. Okay, interesting idea. Says the Mishnah. We'll see, here we go. Really fascinating. Avu no, Shara Sachodesh. A father and a son, Shero es HaChodesh, ultimately again, who see the new moon. We'll say, by the way, there's something so beautiful. Well, the rest of the Mishnah says, Yelchu, they should go ahead and they should go to Beis Din together. We'll say, if you think about that phrase, there's something so beautiful in it. Avu b'no Shero es HaChodesh, or Shero es HaChadash. Sometimes, when a father shows his son the power of his chadshus, when a father models for his son the power of chadash, the power of reinventing himself, the way that father inspires his son to do the same. We rarely remember things that our parents say, but we remember almost everything that our parents do. Ha'av ubino shero es hachodesh, or perhaps a little bit of literary license. Av ubino shero es hachodesh, a father who together with his son sees the hischachos, the chadash, the ability, the power of renewal. What an incredible life lesson that is that a father could convey to his son. So father and son, back to the halacha though. Father and his son who see the new moon together, yelchu, they should go to Beis Din together. Lo shem mitztarfen zemzeh, it's not because they form a testimonial unit, because remember again, a father and son cannot testify together. Ella shemi pasal echad mehem yitztarif hasheni im ha'acher. But rather, again, I will say, this is actually very interesting. You see, normally by Eidos, you're going to see, Eidos HaChodesh, the testimony about the new moon is different on a variety of levels. But one of the interesting ways in which it differs is, normally, in order to form a testimonial unit, the witnesses have to see the same event together. Right? So let me give you just an the most extreme example of this in a capital case. Reuven and Shimon see A kill B. Right? Reuven and Shimon could form a testimonial unit if they were together. Right? If they were in two different places, but they happen to observe the same murder, chas v'shalom, they cannot form a testimonial unit. We're going to see that by Kiddush HaChodesh, interestingly enough, people could form a testimonial unit even if they as long as they observe the same event, even if they did not observe the same event together. So therefore the Mishnah says over here, if father and son both saw the new moon, they should both go to Yerushalayim. Not because they form a testimonial unit, but because if for some reason one of them is disqualified, because also we're going to see, you could be disqualified even if you're telling the truth, right? We're going to see how you mess up on some of the questions, right? You get stage fright, right? You go ahead, people don't like taking tests. I hear this all the time on this Michas Chaber Chabura, right? I like taking tests. Right? So interestingly enough, you could get disqualified, but the good news is, as long as there's one witness there, he could combine with the other. Reb Shimon says, Avu b'no v'chala krovin ksherin le'idos HaChodesh. Reb Shimon disagrees. So we'll say, the position of the Tanna Kama is that the testimony of Kiddush HaChodesh is like general testimony. Just like in general testimony, fathers and sons cannot go ahead and testify together. But I'll just tell you, by the way, you know where this comes up, there's an interesting discussion. We know that Vayechulu on Shabbos night, that you say after davening is eidos, it's testimony. That's why, again, halacha l'maisa, let's say a person davens a little bit of a longer Shemona Esrei, and they finish Mona Esrei after the Tzvi already finished Vayichulu. You're not supposed to say Vayichulu on your own. You're supposed to say Vayichulu with another person. It's an edus. It says discussion in the poskim. Can you say that with your father? Can you say it with your brother? Can you say it with someone who you would not normally be permitted to give edus? So we paskin yes, because it's not that type of edus, and therefore one is permitted to say. Same idea about the hataras nedarim, right? Hataras nedarim, you need a beis din. Normally, again, relatives don't sit on the same beis din together. Hataras nedarim, even relatives could sit on the same beis din together. Interesting, by Vayichulu, there's an interesting position of the Chazon Ish. This is good to keep in your back pocket. The Chazon Ish says that if you're davening after Shkia, which more often than not is what's happening, only times that summertime maybe it doesn't happen. Shkia, the Chazon Ish says, if you can't find someone else to say Vayichulu with, it's okay, because there's no eidos at night anyway, right? The Chazon Ish says that again, Beis Din doesn't accept eidos. So if you don't have someone else to say Vayichulu with, position of the Chazon Ish. Any event. So Reb Shimon disagrees. Reb Shimon says when it comes to Eidos HaChodesh, Abu b'no v'chal hakrovim ksherin la'eidos HaChodesh. Reb Shimon says a father and his son and relatives in general are all permitted to give Eidos HaChodesh. So we'll say really fascinating halacha. Reb Shimon says that the halacha of Eidos HaChodesh is dramatically different than any other Eidos. Rabbi Yossi says, listen to this. This is great. Rabbi Yossi says, Tuvia the doctor. See, he was in Yerushalayim. He saw the new moon. Who did he see it with? With him, the one, his son, the Avdo Meshuchrar. Now, Rabbi Yossi says, it's very interesting. Now, what's an Avdo Meshuchrar? Right? Who is an Avdo Meshuchrar? What is he? He's a Jew. So this is very interesting, right? Avdo Meshuchrar means an Eved Kanani, right? A Gentile slave who was emancipated. Gentile slave who becomes emancipated is fully Jewish, is a full-fledged Jew. So three people see the new moon. Tuvia, the doctor, right? His son and his Avdo Meshuchrar. V'kibul HaKohanim oso, v'yesbino, upaslas Avdo. The Beis Din of Kohanim, we're going to talk about all of this. The Kohanim said, okay, Tuvia, we'll accept you and your son. We won't accept the Avdo Meshuchra. We won't accept your emancipated slave, who's a Jew. We won't accept him. Okay, Shabbat if they Beis Din, and ultimately, again, when they came before Beis Din, meaning the Beis Din, Kiblu Osovies Avdo, they accepted Tuvia, his emancipated Eved, who's a full-fledged Jew, Upaslu Espino, but they wouldn't accept his son. Shabbat say Tosis, if you look at Tosis, Paslas Avdo, in other words, why? First of all, it's just even interesting. An Eved Meshuchrar is a Jew. So what's the havamina that he would not be accepted for Eidos HaChodesh? So if you look at Tosis says, Sabila Reb Shimon demachshir bekarov v'chodesh hazeh lochem hainu bochem v'darshina nami ksherin umiyuchasin lemeute ger umamzer kedarshina meitcha bedomulacha. So we'll say this is quite fascinating. The Beis Din of Kohanim had a different drasha. They held ultimately again. HaChodesh hazeh lochem. This new month is that's the pasuk by Parashas HaChodesh, and bochem can only be sanctified by you. By you means who? People with an intact genealogical status. So that comes to exclude a ger, a convert. It comes to exclude an emancipated slave. It comes to exclude a mamzer. Anyone who does not have an intact genealogical status. So I will say it is interesting that who is the ones who made the drasha? The Kohanim, because Kohanim is the segment of the population that are most makbid on what? Yichus. So it's very interesting. But halacha lamaisa, so the Kohanim accepted Tuvia and ultimately his son. So interesting, the Kohanim would rather have Krovim than to have someone who doesn't have an intact genealogical status or an intact genealogy. But ultimately, again, when they get to the Sanhedrin, they get to the Beis Din in Yerushalayim, the Beis Din Yerushalayim rejected that, says we don't like Krovim, we don't want relatives testifying together, and there's absolutely no genealogical requirement for Eidos HaChodesh. Good, beautiful. Says the Gemara, both says Kavaiter. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Levi, my time to Rabbi Shimon. What's Rabbi Shimon's logic? So we'll say, so now the fundamental machlokas we have, which actually, if you think about it, is like a really serious machlokas. Tanakama holds that fathers and sons, we'll just say relatives, but I'm going to use father and sons right now. Father and son cannot form a testimonial unit for Kiddush HaChodesh. Rabbi Shimon says, yes, they can. What's Rabbi Shimon's logic? What's Rabbi Shimon's logic? So the Gemara says, Dichsiv, listen, this is great. Vayomer Shema Moshe ve'Aaron be'eretz Mitzrayim lemor, HaChodesh hazeh lochem. Because Rabbi Shimon will say like this, look at how it started. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe and to Aaron, when they are standing in Egypt, and to Moshe and Aaron, he says to them, HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. This month, testimony of the new month is given over to you. Eidus Zu Take Sheira Bachem. Remember, Moshe and Aaron are brothers. And here HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving over the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh to them. Rabbi Shimon says that's a model, that's a paradigm to teach us that even first-degree relatives are kosher to give this Eidus together. What do the Rabbanon do with this? None of Rabbanon. Eidus Zu Tehei Mesura Lachem. No. It doesn't mean that the testimony can be given by you. It means this type of testimony is to be given over to or administered by people like you. Which means what Rashi says, Tei Mesura Lachem lechashuve hadar ani moser shikablu ha'idus v'katru hachodesh v'lahach shekrovim. The Rabbanon say, no. HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem means, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, the declaration of the new month is something that is handled by the most important Rabbanim of the generation, like Moshe and Aaron. So I will say, so really quite fascinating. Everything comes down to how you dash in that pasuk, HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. Rabbi Shimon will say, Kadosh Baruch Hu is literally giving over the declaration of the new month to Moshe and Aaron. Moshe and Aaron are brothers. You see from here that Krovim relatives could form a testimonial unit to declare, to go out and come to Beis Din and talk about, and to give testimony about the new moon. The Rabbanan will say, no, HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem is a matter of administering the declaration of the new month. Who handles that process? That ultimately has to be handled by Chashuvi Hadar, the most important Rabbanim of the generations, like Moshe and Aaron. Beautiful. So we'll say, by the way, we'll see. We're going to paskin like the Tanakama, right? Like the first opinion of the Mishnah, namely that halacha l'maisa, relatives cannot testify together about the new moon. But if relatives saw the new moon together, then what? We do have them go up to Yerushalayim. Well, let's finish. I'm getting a little ahead of ourselves. On Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says as follows: Ma'aseh v'Tovia Harofe. So we'll say then there was the story of Tovia Harofe. So Rav Chanan bar Rava. So we'll say. So Rav Chanan bar Rava says Hilchos HaKreb Shimon. So Rav Chanan bar Rava says the halacha follows Reb Shimon, namely that halacha l'maaseh even relatives. So I jumped a little ahead with the halacha. Even relatives are kosher to give testimony about the new moon together. Amrle Rav Huna Rav Chanan bar Rava, Rabbi Yossi umaisa va'at amrit hilchos HaKreb Shimon. So Rav Huna said to Rav Chanan bar Rava, I don't understand. The Mishnah quotes a story. And or I should say the Mishnah quotes Rabbi Yossi and the story. And I also remember again, Rabbi Yossi says the story of Tovia Harofe, and the bottom line of that story is what? That the Beis Din in Yerushalayim did not accept relatives, right? The Beis Din in Yerushalayim accepted the testimony of who? Of Tovia and his emancipated servant, right? And his emancipated Eved. Rejected Tovia and his son. So I don't say how you say that Reb Shimon. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Amar lo. So both say this is fascinating. Rav Chanon said as follows: V'hazimnin sagiin amris kamei derav hilchosa Reb Shimon v'lo amar li v'lo midi. So Rav Chanon says, listen, I'm going to be honest with you. Many times I said this over in front of Rav. I said in front of Rav that the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon, and Rav never contradicted me. So I said the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon, and Rav never said, well, he accepted it. So the Gemara says, this is great. So remember, this is Rav Chanan bar Rava saying the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon. You have Rav Huna saying to Rav Chanan bar Rava, but one second, the Mishnah seems to indicate otherwise. To which Rav Chanan says, well, I don't know what to tell you. Many times I said over in front of Rav that the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon, and Rav never said anything. So listen to this. Rav Huna says to him, by the way, let me ask you, Amarle, Heichi Tanis, by the way, what was the opinion that you attributed to Rabbi Shimon? Amarle Ipcha. To which Rav Chanan said, oh yeah, the opinions were reversed. In other words, that the Rabbi Shimon I said over in front of Rav held like what we have in our Mishnah as the Tanakama, right? So Rav Shimon held that relatives cannot form a testimonial unit for the purposes of Kiddush HaChodesh. So Abba said, this is incredible. So in Rav Chanan's version, the opinions of the Rabbanon and Rabbi Shimon were flipped. So Rabbi Shimon was the opinion who said that you cannot have relatives giving testimony for Kiddush HaChodesh. So the Gemara says, so Amalei Ipcha, That's why Rav never said anything to you, because Rav was not commenting as much on the attribution as much as he was commenting on what? The halacha. So essentially, what you said over in front of Rav was, Rabbi Shimon holds that relatives cannot testify with each other for the purposes of Kiddush HaChodesh. And Rav never said anything. Why? Because Rav agrees with that halacha. So the attribution is in question. You see, in our Mishnah, that's the opinion of the Tanakamo. You, Rav Chanan, are attributing it to Rabbi Shimon. But the reason why Rav never objected is because Rav also holds that halacha l'maisa, relatives cannot join together to testify about the new moon. So the Gemara says, Amar Tavi Berei Derav, Amar Tavi Berei Demari Tavi, Amar Mar Ukva, Amar Shmuel. So we'll say here in the Hagos, it's Yunim, they change it. Ein Hilchasa Rabbi Shimon. The halacha does not follow Rabbi Shimon, namely, relatives cannot testify with each other for the purposes of Kiddush HaChodesh. And I will say, this is how the Rambam paskins in the halachos of Kiddush HaChodesh, Perek Beis Halacha Aleph. The Rambam writes as follows: Ein kasher le'edos HaChodesh el shnei anoshim ksherim haru'uyin laha'id b'chol davar v'davar. So first of all, the Rambam says, who's kasher for Kiddush HaChodesh? Two men who would be permitted to testify in any other situation in halacha, right? So in other words, they need to be kasher edim. We'll get into that in just a little bit. Aval noshim va'avadim harein kshar psule edos ve'in me'idin. Avu b'no shros hayareach. What happens if a father and a son see the new moon together? Yelchu lebeis din. They should travel to Beis Din together. Not because they can testify together. Ultimately, again, not because they can testify together, but if for some reason there's some disqualification, right? We'll say, Pashtos, it happened that you had groups of people, let's say sets of witnesses that were coming up who saw the new moon together, but again, we're puzzled for different reasons. Sometimes they're puzzled because of their status, as we'll get into. Sometimes they can be puzzled because they didn't answer the questions correctly. And this way, again, it's good to have a pool of as many witnesses as you can. So we'll say that's how we pass in halacha l'maisa. Father and son go together, but not because they can give eidos together. They're not allowed to give eidos together. But halacha l'maisa, just in the event that one of them is puzzled, the remaining one could join together, could join with another to form a testimonial unit. So we'll say, here we go. Fascinating Mishnah. Eluheina psulim. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. So now the previous Mishnah made this statement that a father and son go together. Why? She'em yipasel ech mehen, because if one of them becomes puzzle, the other remaining one could join with another person to form a testimonial unit. So I will say, interestingly enough, now the Mishnah discusses what are some examples of things that would puzzle people, right? What are some examples of things that would render someone invalid to be a witness? Here we go. This is incredible. Here is a partial list of those who could be puzzled. Examples. Hamasachik bakuvya. We'll say this is great. That's a Masachik bakuvya. Rashi says kuvya chatichos shal etzem shemasachikin be'eravon. So we'll say Masachik bakuvya is a gambler. Someone who gambles is pasul le'edos. Is not permitted to go ahead and give testimony. Now, Rashi says something very interesting over here. What's wrong with a gambler? So we're going to see Machlokes Rashi and Rambam. So the Rashi says over here, if you go back to that Rashi, they used to make their dice out of bones. So let's let me tell you outside. This is incredible. What's wrong with gambling? Gambling was considered by Chazal to be rabbinic theft. We'll say why. Because here's what's interesting. When you gamble, right? Everyone's intention is to win. And therefore, if I lose, I'm really giving up my money begrudgingly, right? And even if I feign being a good sport, at the end of the day, I'm giving up my money begrudgingly. The act of taking money from someone else, when the person who you're taking it from is giving it begrudgingly, is considered a rabbinic form of theft. It's not biblical theft, because what's biblical theft? I mean, we live in Baltimore. Everybody knows this one, right? I'm saying, right, biblical theft, right? Somebody comes, right, breaks your car window, takes your thing, or somebody comes and robs you. That's biblical theft, right? Rabbinic theft is taking something from someone that they don't really want to give you. And there's a lot of that, for example, pressuring someone to sell something. Even if you're going to give them fair market value, pressuring them to sell is also a form of rabbinic theft. So interestingly enough, the list over here is going to be a list of people who are considered to be gazlon and thieves midrabanan. So the Gemara says, umalavi beribis, another example of this, people who lend with interest. So I will say, so once again, now lending with interest is an isser d'oraisa, right? But what it does is, if you lend with interest, that makes you a rabbinic thief. That is a gazlon midrabanan. Because I will say, by the way, right, violation of an isser d'oraisa does not go ahead and make you pasal eidos, because if it did, there would be no eidos pool, right? Let's be honest, right? But again, what you begin to see is, if you're a gazlon midrabanan, if you are a rabbinic thief, that doesn't sound right, not a rabbinic thief, like right? But if you are a thief midrabanan, then ultimately, again, that renders you pasal eidos. See, fascinatingly enough, lending with interest is considered to be gezmo d'Rabbanan. So by the way, it's very important. That's also halacha l'maaseh. People who are in business, right, and lend money, any type of loan, or you lend money to another person, you have to use a heter iska, right? It's very important. People don't realize this, that halacha l'maaseh, well-meaning people, from people, if you are in the business of lending money, or you are involved personally with lending money, and there is some level of interest or additional surcharges involved, must have a heter iska. Share for a different time. And anyway, the Gemara says, umalavi beribis, so good, beribis, mafriche yonim. Mafriche yonim, what's the order? Mafriche yonim, dove racers. Dove racers. Now, by the way, the Rambam points out, this is not unique to doves. It's anyone who engages in animal racing, right? Of any sorts, right? Dog racing, horse racing, right? Dove racing, whatever it is. It's in the same line as the Masachik Bekuvya. It's in the same line as the gambler. It's all form of gambling, right? All of these things, if you win, right, ultimately you're extracting money from people, like, quote unquote, against their will. Therefore, that is Gezmo d'Rabbanan. Sochrei Shvius, anyone who does commerce with Shemitah produce. So both say, this is very interesting. If you look at Rashi, Sochrei Shvius, Rashi says, Osin Schora Bepero Shvius. They do commerce with Shemitah produce. Drachmana Amar La'achla below the Schora. Ulefi Shenechshedu Kol El Lavar Das Machmas Mamon Chashtum Lios Meidim Sheker Aidimam Shachar. Both say, this is incredible. So interestingly enough, doing commerce with Shemitah produce is Asim D'Rabbanan. It's not explicit D'Oraisa, it's Asim D'Rabbanan. So both say, now what's the common denominator amongst all of these things? They all have to do with money. See, both say, here's what's fascinating. Rashi says, the moment that when it comes to finances, I'm not above board, right? Such a person like that can't give eidos. Why not? Because they both say, once we see that money could sway me to do things that are not entirely appropriate or ethical, that means potentially I could be bought, right? And that means potentially I could be bribed. So it's fascinating, by the way, right? If I struggle with other areas in halacha, that doesn't necessarily compromise my ability to be a witness. But if financially I'm compromised, right? Either again, I'm some type of, I'm a thief midrabanan or something like that. My finances are not above board. Chazal said, in that kind of situation, you're too compromised. Once money could make you do things that are not entirely above board. I will say, and these are not isurim d'oraisa. These are isurim d'rabanan. And remember, you can see this, by the way. This is a high threshold, because a person's gambling and everyone else at the table loses the poker game and I win. They're giving me the money. They're not really giving you the money. So this is a heightened level of ethics and morality that the Torah is commanding us to engage in when it comes to our money, which is it's a high level. So the Gemara says, a person doesn't reach that threshold, don't give eidos. Next, va'avadim, and slaves. And both say, the truth is, avodim is actually different. Rashi points out over here, because avodim can't give eidos mid oraisa. We'll get into that. Zeh klal kol eidos she'in ha'isha ksherala afhein einan ksherala. So both say, essentially what we say is like this: any eidos that a woman is not permitted to give, right? These individuals mentioned in the Mishnah would not be permitted to give as well. So the Gemara says, I ha'isha ksherala afein ksherila, which I will say tells me that any eidos that a woman is permitted to give, these individuals would be permitted as well. Now, I will say, and I remember again, it's fascinating about a woman when it comes to eidos. A woman is not permitted to be a witness in many situations, but yet, in some very, very, very high stakes situation, a woman is absolutely believed. So Rashi says, for example, over here, Ha'isha ksherila kigon lahayid al misas adam lahasies ishto. They will say, for example, a woman is believed to say, let's say Rachel is married to Yaakov, right? And Yaakov is overseas and no one's heard from him. So there's an incredible halacha that one witness could come along and say, I know that Yaakov is dead, and that would allow Rachel to remarry, right? Even if that one witness is a woman, that's permitted. And I both say, that's huge. That's huge. The stakes are so high in that area of Eidos, because if the aid is lying, right, you have inadvertent adultery, you could have potential mamzerus, right, some really significant generational issues. So the Gemara says we can infer from this that any eidos that a woman could give, these individuals listed in the Mishnah could give as well. To which the Gemara says, Amar Rav Ashi, Zos Omeres Gazlon de Divrayim Kesherin le'eidos isha. So we'll say it says that yes, a Gazlon de Divrayim, anyone who is considered to be what we'll call a thief midrabanan, ultimately again would be permitted to go ahead and give any eidos that a woman would be fit to give as well. Take a look at Rashi. Le'eidos isha. Rashi says la'atir le'inase b'dafka gazlan de divrayim. So we'll say, yeah, that essentially that's the halachic construct, that this individual, the gazlan midrabanan, is knocked out from primary eidos, but not totally unfit, because he's not a gazlan d'oraisa. He's only a gazlan, he's gazlan d'rabanan. So he is restricted from many areas of eidos. So what can he do? Pretty much any type of eidos, any type of testimony that a woman is permitted to give, this gazlan midivrayim would be permitted to give as well. So Rashi says over here, le'eidos isha, Rashi says, v'dafka gazlan divrayim, aval gazlan d'oraisa, d'chotzif lavar befarhesya, lo ichshiru chachamim le'eidos isha. So we'll say, interestingly enough, if a person is a gazlan d'oraisa, remember again, what's the gazlan d'oraisa? Literally, that's the guy who goes and robs someone, right? Just take something from someone. Such a person like that will be passed from all eidos. Beautiful. We'll say last Mishnah. So we'll say now we're kind of looping back. We established 2 Mishnahs ago that you're permitted to be mechalel Shabbos in order to go ahead and get to Beis Din, in order to go ahead and give testimony that you saw the new moon. So let's watch this case. Let's say someone saw the new moon. We'll call Ruvain. Ruvain saw the new moon, but he's incapacitated. He's old, he broke his leg, whatever the situation is. He can't travel on his own. What's the halacha? Molichin oso al hachomer. So you could take him on a donkey. Which will say is 2 things. Number 1, you could carry him. Not only that, you could load up an animal, right? Loading up an animal is the malach of mechamer, right? Of loading, you're not allowed to load an animal on Shabbos. One of the malachas. So you're allowed to go ahead and put him on a donkey. Afilu b'mita. You can even go ahead and take him in his bed. Vim soda lahen. And it will say if it's dangerous, lochin biyadan maklos, right? Take staffs, take weapons. Take weapons. And also, right, a good lesson. Jews have to defend themselves as well, right? Jews have to defend. You can't always rely on everyone else to defend you. Right? So ultimately, again, so they take in their hands maklos. They take staffs in their hands. Vim haisa derech rachoka. And if it was a very long journey to Yerushalayim, lochin biyadam mizonos. You could take food. Sha'amahalich laila v'yom mechal Shabbos. I will say, here's what's interesting. You're only allowed to be mechal Shabbos if what? If you can make it within 1 night and 1 day, right? Because think about this for just a moment. Let's say you live in a place where it's a 2-day journey from Yerushalayim. Can you be mechal Shabbos for that? No. Why? Think about this just logically. Remember, when are you seeing the moon? At most, when are you seeing the moon? When are you seeing the moon? Night 30. Night 30, right? Because that's it. Remember again, that means the 30th day is Rosh Chodesh. If it's a 2-day journey, you're not getting there anyway until when? Until the end of day 30, which means Beis Din would already be Makadish the Chodesh de facto. So the only time you would be able to Mechalo Shabbos, to travel to Beis Din, would be when you could get there in a time where your testimony is actually impactful. But if you're going to miss the window anyway, you can't be Mechalo Shabbos for that. Incredible. The Gemara says, Shamahalech. Shamahalech Laila V'yom Mechal Shabbos. V'yotzi le'idus HaChodesh. Shne'emar, and I will say, how do I know once again that I'm permitted to be Mechalo Shabbos for Eidos HaChodesh? I will say, remember again, to be clear, who's being Mechal Shabbos over here? These are the witnesses who see the moon, right? Not the witnesses who are going out to dispatch the information. How are you allowed to do this? Ela mo'adei Hashem asher tikru'u osam b'mo'adam. These are the holy convocations. These are the appointed times of Hashem that you shall call them out in their appointed times. Shabbosai b'mo'adam teaches us that ultimately, again, in order to go ahead and ensure the Yom Tovim are in their right time, ultimately, again, you're allowed to be Machal Shabbos or b'mo'adam also means that declaring the new month in the right time is so incredibly important in its appointed, whenever that appointed time is. Even if it requires you to travel on Shabbos, ultimately that's what you do. Incredible. But say Hadron Allah, Arba Rashi Shanim Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. Good, beautiful. Enough celebration. Let's go right there. Imeinon, Makirin also. So we'll say now watch this. So now we're going to get a little bit more into the mechanics. So we'll say, so now what we've done is up until now, we've been focusing on who can give the testimony, how can they get there? They could be Machalo Shabbos, and now this last Mishnah told us they could even take whatever they need for the journey together along with them. Now, we're fast forwarding a little bit. Now the Eidim are arriving at the Beis Din. So Mishnah says as follows: "Einun makirin also." Now here's what's interesting. Let's say the witness, right? He's going. I live in. I keep using Modi'in, right? I'm using Modi'in. I think it was because Noah Lasson was just here last Shabbat as I'm thinking about it, right? So you go ahead and right. So I live in Modi'in. I'm going from Modi'in. I'm going to Yerushalayim to go ahead and give testimony. So we'll say, here's the problem. No one knows me, right? No one knows me. I come to Yerushalayim. I show up. I'm just a guy. No. How does Beis Din know that I have ne'emanos? So the Mishnah says, "Im einon makirin also." If Beis Din does not know me, the aid ultimately mishalchin imo achar la'ido. So the local Beis Din of my town will send another guy with me as what? Essentially a character reference. So we'll say, look at Rashi just a moment. Im ein makirin also. Im ein Beis Din makirin asa'id im neman v'kashu. If the Beis Din Yerushalayim doesn't know me, so they don't know if I'm a reliable witness or not, mishalchin, the Beis Din Shabiro, the Beis Din in my city sends a character reference with me to testify about that I'm an upstanding guy. So the Gemara says, by the way, Mishnah says it wasn't always like this. See, in general, we assume that when a person walks into Beis Din, assuming we know for sure that they're Jewish, a Jew has a ne'emanos, has a cheskes kashrus. Right, Shabbos say we don't start with character references for edus. Right, the person has a cheskes kashrus. This is so important to know in life in general. Every Jew has a cheskes kashrus. Again, could you lose your cheskes kashrus? Sure, of course you can. Just like a restaurant could lose their hashkacha, right? If there's shenanigans happening, a Jew could lose his cheskes kashrus also if there's spiritual shenanigans happening. Absolutely, he could have. So both say, so now listen to this. So the Mishnah says as well over here in the beginning. So a person would show up, and they would go ahead and they now again remember, Beis Din is going to ask them a series of questions as we're going to see. But a guy has a cheskes kashrus, so you don't need character witnesses. Listen to this. Mishakilkalu habaitusim. When the baitusim got involved, so I will say, who are the baitusim? Remember again, the baitusim were a sect of people who did not believe in Torah Sheba'al Peh. So they were bent on undermining rabbinic authority. Right? So therefore, again, they tried, and we're going to see, by the way, why they tried to tamper specifically with Kiddush HaChodesh. So ultimately, again, they would send in false witnesses. So what happened? When the Baitusim were sending in false witnesses, his skinu shelo yehe makablet ela min ha'makirin. Beis Din made a rule, bless you. Beis Din made a rule, you can only accept testimony from people who we know. And if we don't know you, you need to bring a character reference in order for us to accept your edus. Incredible. So the Gemara says, just by the way, my acher. So we'll say, when you read the Mishnah, I just want to point out over something very interesting. The Mishnah is phrased in a singular, right? The Mishnah says, Im ein makirin oso, right? Again, let's go with my example. I live in Modi'in. I'm going to give testimony. Everything is phrased in the singular. I'm going to give testimony. No one knows who I am. So what does the Mishnah say? The Beis Din of my town sends a character reference, a character witness with me. So the Gemara says, my acher chad. It sounds like Beis Din is only sending one character witness with me. I'm in base. The chad mi mehemin. But 1 second, does that work? Would one witness be believed to be a character reference? But Tanya, we learned, Ma'aseh shebahu ve'edav imo laha'id alav. The Gemara talks about a story that one time, one of the witnesses came before Beis Din right, on Shabbos, ve'edav imo laha'ideh, and he brought witnesses with him to testify about his character. So we'll say, it sounds like, how many character witnesses do you need? How many character? 2. And we'll say, by the way, that seems pashut. Testimony in general, except for a few specific circumstances, always requires a testimonial unit of 2. So b'pashtus, even character testimony should require 2. Amar Papa, my acher. Rav Papa says, you're right. What is it when the Mishnah says that if Beis Din Yerushalayim doesn't know who I am, they send another witness, acher, zug acher. It doesn't mean another witness singular. It means what? Another set, another pair. So if again, I am not known in the Beis Din in Yerushalayim, the Beis Din of my locale will send another set of witnesses, another pair of witnesses to come with me to testify on my behalf that I'm an upstanding guy. So Gemara says, by the way, this makes sense. Remember the Mishnah says, if they don't recognize me, the aid, so my oso, if they say just one, then I'm also just means one witness. Is one witness enough ultimately for Kiddush HaChodesh? No. Mishpat ksiv bey. It says Mishpat by Kiddush HaChodesh. And Mishpat always requires 2 witnesses. Ela my oso. Rather, what does it mean when it says if they don't know me? Means my unit, my group, my 2 witnesses. Hachanami my acher. Ultimately, again, what does it mean over here? Acher, another zug acher. It means another zug as well. But saying I forgot to do the Masachik Bakovia. Okay. I'll come back to it in just a bit. Don't let me leave before I share with you something incredible over here. The Chad Milam. So it's therefore again where the Mishnah is holding right now. Davi, is there football this morning? There is. Okay. So I have to get this in before. I said I was going to finish by 45. Okay, good. You'll give me this until 10-2. Give me 2 more minutes, and I'll just tell you this. Else I said the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, "Hachanami my acher zug acher." So to over here. So therefore, I'm going to say the Gemara is suggesting over here that even though the Mishnah is phrased in the singular, it actually means plural. It's talking about there are 2 witnesses going on from Modi'in, right? Me and my friend, but no one knows us. So Beis Din will send a pair of character witnesses for us. So the Gemara says, is that true? That one witness is... Here's what's interesting. Because the truth is, this is kind of like the first time we've been introduced to the concept of character testimony. Right? Up until now, right, when we think about testimony, right, what is testimony? What we'll call circumstantial testimony, right? Or event testimony. I'm telling you something I saw. Now we have a new concept called character testimony. So the Gemara says, ultimately, again, what's character testimony? Is one? Why would we assume? I'm sorry. The Chalo Mehemin is one person not believe for character testimony. Vatanya, we learned Ma'aseh Rabbi Norai Shalach Eitzel Ha'ed Lahaydala b'Shabbos b'Usha. One time, Rabbi Norai went to the witness, right, to testify about his character in Usha. Rashi says Usha. Kishayashva Sanhedrin Sham v'Sham Hayu Mekanshin HaChodesh. So what's it? This is talking about when the Sanhedrin relocated to the city of Usha. So one time it happened that Rabbi Nehorai went ultimately again to the city of Usha to be a character witness. Now Rabbi Nehorai is how many people? Right? Not a trick question. 1. So it sounds like one person could be a character reference, to which the Gemara says, Amri, Rabbi Norai Sadachrina Havabade. Vahadulo Chashivle Mishum Kavodo Rabbi Norai. No, there was another guy. There was another guy with Rabbi Norai. But out of kavod, the other guy was just a regular guy. So out of kavod and deference to Rabbi Norai, they did not mention the other individual. Okay. Amra, so the Gemara says, right. Amra Rabbi Norai Sadachrina Habusha. Or the other possibility is, Ravashi Amar, Rabbi Norai Sadachrina Habusha. Rabbi Norai actually had another witness in Usha. Also Rabbi Norai Litztarufe Bahadei. And Rabbi Norai went to Usha to combine with this other witness to form a testimonial unit. So the Gemara says, Ihachi Maila Memra. If that's the case, then what's the Chiddush? It's 2 witnesses. Ma'odetema Misveka Lo Mechalalinan Shabsa. Rabbi said, this is incredible. You might have thought as follows. You might have thought that maybe out of Safek, now remember, this is actually dramatically new. Rabbi Norai is traveling to Usha on Shabbos for what purpose? To give character testimony. There's another guy in Usha who also knows the aid. Now, it's a little bit of a suffix. Why? Because Rabbi Norai, maybe the other guy's not going to be home. You might have thought that out of a suffix, you can't be Machalo Shabbos to go to Usha to serve as the character witness for the witnesses who saw the Kiddush HaChodesh. Kamash V'lon you can. Which I will say something quite fascinating, because now what you see also is that not only can you be Mechalel Shabbos in order to go ahead and what? Give testimony about what you saw, but it sounds like you could also be Mechalel Shabbos for what purpose? Character testimony, which of course makes sense because the witnesses cannot be accepted without the character testimony. So the character testimony becomes as important as the very testimony of seeing the new moon itself. Quite incredible. Ki asa ula amar kachua liyarcha b'ma'arava. So we'll say ultimately again, when Ula came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said to the people in Bavel, by the way, they were Mekadesh the new month in Eretz Yisrael. Mekadesh the new month in Eretz Yisrael. Amrav Kahana, lo mi boy Ula de gavarabahu de mehemen. Now we'll say, interestingly enough, when Ula says that, we believe him. We believe him. Right? Now we'll say, just understand what's happening over here. Ula's coming from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, and he's giving the people of Bavel information. Just want to tell you guys, in Eretz Yisrael, they just sanctified the new moon. He was there. He saw it. He knows what happened. So the Gemara says, we believe him, and we act accordingly. Now the Gemara says, Rav Kahana says, by the way, it's not just Ula. It's any, afilu inish ta'alma nami mehemen. Rabbi said, this is incredible. Any person who shows up and tells us that they declared the new month in Eretz Yisrael, we believe them. What if we don't know them? We still know us, and I want to point out, all they're telling us is what? What are they telling us? What are they telling us? Information, not subjective information, objective information. And the Gemara says, we believe them. We believe them, no matter who it is. Why do we believe them? This is incredible. Because we assume the following. Kol milsa da'avida legaluye lo meshakri ba'inshi. We assume that people don't lie about things that will become known. See, when do people lie? When do people lie? B'pashtos? When they get away with it. Right? If I know that something is going to become public information, I don't lie about it, because then my lie will be discovered. See, so the Gemara says, if someone shows up in Bavel and they say, by the way, they were Mekadesh the Chodesh in Eretz Yisrael, right? And so the Gemara of Kahana says we can believe them. Why? Because at some point in time that information is going to become known. So if the guy is lying, he'll be made as a liar. So we assume that any piece of information that will become publicly clear in some point in time, people tell the truth. So it's actually a very interesting halacha. So therefore, again, if somebody shows up at another place and they say, by the way, in Eretz Yisrael Mekadesh the Chodesh, we believe them. Incredible. Taina Achibrais that supports this. If someone comes from the other side of the world and he says, by the way, Bezin was Mekadesh the Chodesh, we believe him. Why? I just want to point out, this is a general Klan halacha. This is not unique here. In general, we assume that people tell the truth in any matter where the truth will become quickly known to everyone else. It's incredible insight of human psychology or human behavior. People only lie when they think they could get away with it. But at the end of the day, if I know the truth will become known to everyone, people don't lie. Incredible yisod. But so we'll say, remember again, now the Mishnah said before, it used to be that they mekabel the kiddush HaChodesh from anyone. Then what happened? The Baitusim got involved, and they tried to wreck the system. Rabbi say, incredible story. Listen to this Maisa. Ten Rabbanon, ma kilkul Baitusim. Rabbi say, this is wild. What did the Baitusim do? And how could people upend the system? Listen to this. Here we go. One time, the Baitusim wanted to go ahead and derail the Chachamim. Then I will say, now I want to point out over here, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Why were the Baitusim so bent on messing this up? Look at this. She'ira yom lamed shal adar b'Shabbos, v'lo nira chodesh bizmano, v'Baitusim mis'aven she'yom rishon shal Pesach b'Shabbos. I will say, listen to this. If you're a Baitusi, there's one thing you want more than anything in this world. Right? This is good. If you have a Baitusi in your life, right? Good to know what they want. Right? If you have a Baitusi, the one thing they want more than anything in this world is they want Pesach to fall out on Shabbos. Hatzlacha. Right? They want the Baitusim to go ahead and they want Pesach to fall out on Shabbos. Why? Because Rabbi said, listen to this. Because how does the Torah describe the Hava'as HaOmer? Omimacharas HaShabbos. Right? So the Baitusim feel that the second day Pesach always has to be a Sunday. Always has to be a Sunday. Now remember, the Baitusim do not believe in Torah Shebaal Peh, right? So they do not believe in the verbal law, the oral law. They don't believe in that. So we understand Macharas Shabbos means the second day of Pesach. Shabbos doesn't refer to Shabbos. Shabbos refers to Pesach. So the Baitusim saw an opportunity here, the way that Adar was ending, to corrupt the system a little bit and to make it that ultimately, again, and that's what Rashi points out over here, that they saw that the 30th of Adar was falling out on Shabbos, and if they manipulate the system just a little bit, Pesach could fall out on a Shabbos, second day Pesach falls out on a Sunday, and they would just be over the moon. No pun intended, right? Over the moon about this. So what do? Look at this. Sakru shnei bnei Adam b'dalam zuz. They hired two guys, cost them 400 zuz, right? Now watch this. Echad mishalanu ve'echad mishalahem. Now, one of the guys was a Baitusi, and one of them was mishalanu. What does it mean, mishalanu? One of ours, right? Deep cover, right? He was a deep covered tzaddik. So he'll say, watch this. It's a great story. So hey, they do. So what happens? So shalahem. So down these two guys show up in Beis Din. Shalahem, hey, they do. So v'yatza. So the Baitusi gives his testimony, which of course was a lie. He gave his testimony, but they accepted it, by the way. They accepted it, and he left. So the Gemara says, Shalanu Amrulo, Amar Ketzar Isa. So the guy, the Shalanu, right, the deep covered tzaddik, he comes in and he says, I'll give you my testimony. Listen to this. He says, Amar Lahem, Ola Hayisi Ma'ale Adumim. So he says, I was going up in Ma'ale Adumim. Right? I was going up right in Ma'ale Adumim, and what happened? First white line. I saw the moon, and look how I saw the moon. I saw the moon was crouching in between two stones. Rosha Doma Le'egel, the head of the moon looked like a calf. Aznav Doman Legdi, its ears looked like a kid. Karnav Domos Tzvi, its horns looked like a deer. Uznavo Monachas Lo Ben Yirei Kosev, and its tail was between its legs. When I look at it, I was so startled that I fell back. And if you don't believe it, and if you don't believe me, I have 200 zuz in my cloak that proves that I'm right. So you realize, wow. Amrlo, mihiski kakalakach. So he said to him, who put you up to this? So in other words, he told him, obviously the moon never looks like this, by the way. Just right? The moon never looks like this, right? No time of the month does the moon look like this. And he tells him, I got paid to say this. I got paid to say, who put you up to this? So Amar Lahem, Shamati Shebikshu Baitusim Lahatos. I saw on whatever it was Craigslist, right? The Baitusim put out, right? Looking for a guy to give false aid to Sachodesh, right? And I figured, you know what? Amarti Elech Ani Vaudia Lahem Shemeyavo Bnei Adam She'ina Mehuganin. So the guy said, you know what? I realize it's wrong to give false testimony, but I figured if it's me, I could at least be like the undercover guy and tell you, the Rabbanim, what is really happening here. Amrulo, they said to this deep covered tzaddik, Amrulo Masayim Zuz Nesunum L'chab Matana. First of all, you can keep the money. That's the first. You keep the money. Rashi points out over here, how could they allow him to keep the money? It's not Beis Din's money. There's a concept of Beis Din. Because remember, he was given the money in order to do what? He was given the money for a job. Did he do the job? No. So how could he keep the money? So Rashi says Beis Din Hefker Beis Din. Or I'm sorry, Hefker Beis Din Hefker. Right? Ultimately, again, I will say Beis Din, which there's what's the legal term for this? Eminent domain. Right? Although Hefker Beis Din Hefker is much more expansive. Beis Din has control over all monetary transactions. And therefore Beis Din has the right to take money from A and to place it in B. So Beis Din decided ultimately again to go ahead and give the money to this individual. Listen to this. Vasochrecha yimatach ala amud. But the guy who hired you, we're going to stretch him out on the post, which is another way of saying he's going to get malchus. Ba'os shah, in that moment, hiskinu, they instituted shelo yu mekablin ela min hamakirin. They both say at that moment, after this story, they instituted that we will no longer accept eidos except from someone who we recognize. So both say it was this one story. And as a result of this one story, ultimately, again, they legislated that we will not accept your testimony unless we know who you are. And if we don't know who you are, you need to come with a character reference. And only then and only then will we accept your testimony. I'll conclude with this. I'll just say something amazing. This ties in so beautiful. We'll stop here at the Mishnah, but I'll just tell you how this ties in so beautifully to the end of yesterday's daf. Remember again, what happened at the end of yesterday's daf? We had Shlomo HaMelech, right? Shlomo HaMelech, Koheles. And remember again, what did Koheles ask for? Bikesh Koheles limso divrei chaypetz. Remember again, what did Koheles want? What did he ask from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? I want to be able to adjudicate cases without witnesses, without hasra'ah, without testimony, just in my heart. Because they're both saying, what does Shlomo Melech realize? What did Shlomo Melech realize? You could fool people. And you could actually fool anyone. You could fool anyone. Remember again, this by Tusim, it almost worked. It's only because it happened to be that there was a righteous guy who answered the ad and decided to pose as a Baitusi. But Lamaisa, the first guy's testimony, the first Baitusi's testimony was accepted. So you see over here how fragile the system is and how it is susceptible to lies, how it is susceptible to falsehood, because such is the nature in general of human judgment. Human judgment is always limited, and human judgment is always inherently flawed. That's the way it works. So now you understand Shlomo Melech's tefillah. Shlomo Melech's Baruch Hu, just give me the wisdom. It's not my wisdom, but endow me with the divine wisdom to intuit, right or wrong. Save me the trouble of listening to people, because people often lie, they often tell, or they don't even lie, they tell their version of truth, and sometimes it is the truth, sometimes it's not the truth. So give me the koach, give me the wisdom to be able to do it. Now you understand it, because here we saw the system was almost manipulated. And again, you manipulate the calendar, you manipulate everything, and it almost happened. It was this close to occurring. That's the tefillah of Shlomo HaMelech. And remember again, but it's important to understand, what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell Shlomo HaMelech? What did he tell him? He said, Yosher divrei emes al pi shnayim edim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Shlomo, no. Let's keep the system I gave you. 2 witnesses come and they give testimony. They both say, reinforcing an incredible yesod. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not need us to be divine. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not need us to be angelic. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not need us to be perfect. He needs us to be human. And he understands that even in our humanity, there are faults, there are limitations, right? That's just the way it is. Is every judgment correct? Every judgment is as correct as it can be in the circumstances that are provided. And Abba said that becomes the metaphor for life. Kadosh Baruch Hu asks us just to do the best with the circumstances we are given, just to try our best in the situation in which we find ourselves. No more and no less. Shlomo HaMelech wants to create a judicial system of perfection, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, that's not what I need of you in this world. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to do the best with the testimony, with the circumstances, with the life, and with the world in which you live in. We'll stop over here. We'll pick up with the new Mishnah Meir Hashem tomorrow. Mesachei B'Kuvya, 8:58. Mesachei B'Kuvya Meir Hashem is going to be tomorrow. I'm going to start the show with it tomorrow, Meir Hashem.
When you have the witness at the town, he goes to the basement. Will they